what kind of person would you be? Just speculate. What kind of person would you be if every prayer you prayed was answered immediately the way you wanted it? Happy? I don't think so. You would be, I actually know you, so I'll tell you what you would be. You would be selfish and greedy, is what you would be.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, I got some good news for you this morning because I'm finally going to finish the series I began weeks ago called Faith Forward. And we've been looking at Hebrews chapter 11 that says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And so, week 1, we talked about the enemy of faith. The enemy of faith was fear. Some of you remember week 2 was unreasonable faith. Week 3 was undeniable faith. Week 4 was specific faith, where I taught you to pray specifically. I know, this stuff's rocket science. But there you go. Well, this is our final concluding message in the series, Faith Forward, and it's called Tested Faith. And most of the time I've been giving you pretty upbeat stuff through this, but I would be remiss and irresponsible not to show you the other side of the coin, that you actually can't have faith and not have it tested. Nobody gets a free ride. Did you know that? It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. Everybody will get tested in their faith. I mean, let me ask you this question. When you think of Jesus' disciples, who was Jesus' favorite? Now, I know most of you are thinking it's me, but I'm talking about 2,000 years ago. Who was Jesus' favorite? Some would go with John. John thought he was the favorite, didn't he? He said, the disciple Jesus loved. He was referring to himself, for goodness sakes. I look at the story. I think Peter was the one. I think that Jesus had a real soft spot for Peter. And, he became this leader of the church, and great things happened with Peter. But I want you to think about what Jesus said to him at one point, just before this all came to a conclusion. He said, Peter, Satan has asked for you that he might sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you that your faith will not fail. Did you catch that? He said, look, you're going to go through a test here, and Satan is going to test you, and he's going to sift you like wheat. But good news, I've prayed that you'll endure it and your faith won't fail. That's not the prayer I want Jesus to pray for me. I want Jesus to remove the temptation entirely, don't you? But he didn't do it. And Jesus made us a promise, and it's this. He said, you will have tribulation in this world. How many have that up in your fridge? Yeah. Just one guy, and he's lying. He said, you will have tribulation. That is the promise. And what we're going to discover today is that it kind of goes with the territory, and you can't be a Christian, at least a good Christian, without suffering some sort of trial in life. And we're going to look at a very important passage for every Christian that we all need to know. And it's James chapter 1, or verse 1. It says this, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various troubles, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. He says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials or troubles. Now, here's what's sort of interesting about this. If you're reading chronologically in the scripture, you just got through the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, chapter 11, is the Faith Hall of Fame, and all these wonderful things about faith and how without God it's impossible to, please him without faith, and faith is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him, and all those wonderful things about faith. And then we get into James' book, which is right after the book of Hebrews, and he opens with this, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. What is wrong with this dude? Talk about Pastor Killjoy, right? I mean, we just got through Hebrews. We're all excited about faith. And he comes along and he tells us you're going to have trouble. And what you need to do is you need to count it all joy. And that's what you do, right? When you fall into various trials, you count it all joy, right? You're pretty excited about that. Woohoo! I got cancer. Yahoo! I broke my leg. Yee! I went bankrupt. We do not do that. So what does he know that we don't know? And his point is this, is it doesn't matter who you are, your faith is going to be tested. So I'm going to give you just 2 points today, another real simple message on faith. And here's my 2 points. They're this. And the first one is this, is to embrace adversity. And the second one is to exercise patience. And both of them are here in the text. How many of you are familiar with Ann Landers, the advice columnist? Ann Landers, you know this name. Most of you, you're old enough to remember. But she was once asked the question, what was the greatest advice you could give? And she said this. She said, if I could give one single piece of advice that I think would be useful for all humanity, I would say this. Expect trouble as an inevitability of life. Look it straight in the eye and say, I am bigger than you and I will not be defeated. Her advice was, expect to have trouble in this world. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how we embrace adversity and why we would need to embrace that and what that might look like. So I'm going to use as a bit of a narrative. I'm going to use the story of Joseph. Most of you know this story, and so if you know this really well, just pretend you're listening and pretend you're enjoying it, and every once in a while smile and nod, and I'll be happy. And the story of Joseph goes like this. We have Joseph being the 11th son, 17 years old, something like that, and he has this dream that his 10 brothers all bow down to him. Then he has another dream where his father and mother and his brothers all bow down to him. So he's pretty excited. He's 17 years old, bit of a spoiled kid. And so he goes and he tells his brothers about this wonderful dream. And they were not as excited about it as he was. In fact, their first response was, let's kill him. That was what they had originally decided. But let me have you think about this for a moment. Supposing that we know this, that the dream was of the Lord. God gave him that dream, and that was the plan, and that was going to happen. But what would have happened if they had bowed down to him right then and there? Oh, Joseph, yeah, you're amazing. Whoa, Joseph, you're awesome. What would have happened? Would it have helped anybody? Wouldn't it help Joseph? Wouldn't it help them? Wouldn't it help anybody? And so it was a pointless exercise at that moment. And so because he shared this dream with his older brothers, who decided at that point they would hate him, it set up a lemony snicket series of unfortunate events. And what they did was they sold him off as a slave. And then he ended up as a slave in Egypt. And as a slave in Egypt, in a foreign country, in a foreign language, and foreign religion, he ended up in Potiphar's house. Now, he was doing pretty well in Potiphar's house until Potiphar's wife got a look at him. And she was a bit of a cougar, if you know what I mean. And so she hits on him. He rebuffs her appeal. And, of course, she's angry, so she tears her clothes and claims she was raped. And now he goes from being a slave to being a prisoner. Imagine how this thing is progressing. It's not going linearly up. It's going linearly down. And he's now a prisoner in a dungeon in Egypt. And yet we find this amazing attitude that he continues to serve God, even in the midst of these challenges. And then what happens was you remember the story, he interprets a couple of dreams while he's in prison, and then the Pharaoh has this dream, and it's really vexed him. He can't even remember what the dream was. And then the jailer knows that this Joseph interprets dreams, and so he hooks him up with the Pharaoh. And so Joseph says, yeah, here's the dream. You had a dream of 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows, and what it means is you're going to be having 7 good years and then 7 bad years of drought and famine. And, of course, the Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph, he pulls him out of prison. Talk about a reversal of fortune. He pulls him out of prison and into the palace, and he becomes basically the prime minister over Egypt, administrating all the grains so that they can store them for these 7 good years so that they can go through the 7 bad years. After the 2nd year of the famine, which was also affecting his family back home in Canaan's land, his brothers show up, and what do? They bow down. The dream finally happens, and they bow down. Now, they don't recognize Joseph because many years have gone by. But anyway, what happens, you remember the story, was that they discovered that, of course, this was their brother, and he saved the day. And in fact, not only did he give them grain, but the whole family moved and lived in Egypt under the care of Joseph. And so he saved the day as a result of this. And of course, they were so ashamed of themselves, and they were repentant, and they said, well, we're so sorry for what we did years ago. We should never have done that. And he essentially says, look, you thought it was bad, but it was the Lord's plan all along, and that what you meant for evil, the Lord has turned around for good. But here's what I don't want you to miss, was that even though he was living a series of unfortunate events and it went from bad to worse, he never lost his attitude. He never became bitter. He never left his Lord and denied him. What did he do? The scripture says that he found favor in the sight of the Lord, and he was a very successful man. That's what it says about him when he was a slave. And then when he became a prisoner, it says the Lord was with him, and everything he set his hand to prospered. I don't know how you prosper in prison, but he prospered. And so the whole essence of this is that in the midst of the trial, he had to keep his heart right and his attitude right. And what he did, now I'm sure he didn't love every moment of it, but he embraced the adversity because he understood what Paul tells us in Romans chapter 8, that all things work together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. We have a hard time believing that, don't we? That all things work together for good. We don't think all good things work together for good. That's not what he says. He says all things, good, bad, and indifferent, they're all working together. But you have to embrace adversity and keep a good attitude. I'm going to tell you a little story about my journey. You'll probably laugh at me, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I've actually only been seriously ill once in my life. And I got this crazy disease called blastomycosis. Anybody know what that is? Few people, a couple of hands. You can really only get it in a couple of places in the world. One of them is Kenora, Ontario. And what it is there's the blastomyces fungus, and it grows in the woods on trees, and you breathe in the spores, and then it goes and lives in you. And most of the time, 90% of the time, it presents itself in your lungs kind of like pneumonia. And if you're not treated, you die. That's kind of how this disease works. But here's the worst part of it. What happens is when you're exposed to it, it doesn't present the symptoms right away. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. So probably in July, because that's when I was there, I breathed in the spores, and I didn't get sick until the end of December, 6 months later. Now, here's the part I don't want to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Like I said, 90% of the time it goes into the lungs. The other 10%, it lands somewhere else in your body. It goes through your bloodstream, can end up in your brain, can end up in your kidney, all kinds of different places. Mine ended up, for lack of a better term, in my groin. And so there I was. I wasn't even at home. We were on holidays when it happened. We were in Florida at Orlando. We had taken our kids to Disney World. And all of a sudden, this thing had happened to me. So I was dropping my kids at Disney World and Kathy, and then I was going to the emergency room, where I was misdiagnosed and spent the entire week of my holidays on IV antibiotics at the local hospital. If you think Disney World's expensive, try American health care, all right? So anyway, every morning I drove them to Disney, I went to the hospital, had a great holiday. And so at the end of a week, the doctor said to me, "You're all cured." I thought, I'm not all cured. See, they'd given me antibiotics. Antibiotics are going to do nothing for a fungal infection. And so it wasn't helping. They didn't know what it was. They, of course, wouldn't have any frame of reference being in Florida. So then we got in the car. We drove 36 hours back to Winnipeg. Honest to God truth, I dropped my family off at our door, pulled back out of the driveway, and drove myself to the emergency room, where I was again misdiagnosed and spent the next 2 weeks on IV antibiotics. At the end of 2 weeks, the doctor said, "Well, you're all cured. You can go home." I said, "I'm not cured." They said, "Yep, you can go home." Long story short, eventually I found a doctor that was willing to try something, because they didn't know what I had. They didn't know if I had cancer or what the problem was. They had no idea. So the doctor finally said, "Well, we're going to do, if you're willing, exploratory surgery." Now, understand this. I'm going through this. I'm pastoring the church. I'm struggling up here every week. I can't exactly tell everybody what my issue is, right? Fortunately, I had a daughter who was in grade 4 who was telling everybody. And one day in class, or at her Christian school, her teacher says, "Does anyone have a prayer request?" And she said, "I have one." And she said, "What do you want prayer for?" "Well, I need you to pray for my dad." She said, "What's wrong with your dad?" He's got a swollen crotch. So she came home. I said, seriously? You told them I had a swollen crotch? You told your whole class that? She said, I didn't know how else to describe it. So anyway, I finally get into surgery, and they tell me, they described it as exploratory surgery. I didn't know that meant they were going in to mine for gold. And when I woke up for the surgery, I had multiple incisions. Well, we had to, dig around a little bit. And they'd pulled some mass out of there. They'd cut some mass out of there. They still didn't know what it was, actually. They had to send it off for a pathology, and they didn't know for a week until it came back from the lab that it was blastomycosis. And so anyway, they came back. They said, you got to be on antifungal drugs for the next 6 months to a year, which I was. But here was the problem. They had cut and sliced and diced so much up that I couldn't walk. And they had cut muscle and tissue and different things. Now, I don't know if you know this. I preach every Sunday, and I'm on television. Did you know this? So I had to show up. And so I was showing up, and you all thought that I was smiling. That thing on my face? It was a grimace of pain. And week after week, I was showing up in this extraordinary pain, faking it. I always fake it, but I was especially faking it then. And so there I was, and I just became so disheartened with my situation. I thought, well, it's great that they found it, and it's great that I'm on these medications, but I just want to be able to walk without a limp. I want to be able to walk without pain. And I would see people run, and I'd long to run and think if I'd be happy to walk properly. And so that's sort of what was going on with me. And so then I started feeling sorry for myself in the midst of my adversity, and I was glad I wasn't dying. I guess that was the upside. And I was reading the story of Jacob. And it said that Jacob wrestled with God all night, and in the morning he touched his hip. And then it says he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And I thought to myself, Jacob wrestled with God, and he still ended up walking with a limp. And then I thought to myself, you know what? Here I am wrestling with God. Feels like I'm losing. And I'm wrestling with God in prayer and hoping for the answer to this thing and the remedy of this thing. And I thought, you know what? If Jacob walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and if I have to walk with a limp for the rest of my life, you know what? I'm going to embrace that adversity. I mean, that wasn't my desire. That's not what my faith was. But I was believing I was going to be totally healed. But I thought, you know what? If it's good enough for Jacob, it's good enough for me. And this is what I want to tell you. I learned more about walking in faith during that trial than I ever did in any victory I've ever had. You see, it's the times of adversity that we grow. It's the times of challenge and conflict and struggle and illness. And that's why Paul says, I will rather boast in my infirmity. Why would he say such a thing? Because he knows that when we are weak, he is strong. And it's in those moments that God moves and does something within our hearts, and we grow in faith. And it was fascinating, because when I finally embraced my adversity and said, well, if Jacob wrestled with God and walked with a limp, then I'm willing to do the same. That's when I started to get better. And within actually just a few short weeks, maybe even days, all of a sudden the pain was gone. I was walking fine, and everything was great. And today, I'm completely symptom-free. I have no symptoms whatsoever. The only thing I have left is the scars. You want to see them? I was hoping you would say no. Last night, someone said, yeah. I'm not showing you the scars you knit. Here's what I want you to understand about this. You'll all go through adversity, and you need to count it all joy. It's not an easy thing to do. And the story of Joseph's wonderful, isn't it? Because he got to see how the whole thing played out. He was able, at the end of the day, to look back and see how all the dots connected. Wasn't that wonderful? But here's the bad news for you. You're not always going to see the dots all connect. They're connected, you just can't see it. And someday you will see it, but most of the time, you're not going to be able to see it. And you just have to tough it out and realize that God is using that situation to make you a better person, a better leader, and a better Christian. So the first thing, the big point that I don't want you to miss is this, is that we need to embrace adversity. The second thing is we need to exercise patience. Let's take one more look at this verse. And the verse says this. It says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So he tells us that the key to faith is actually what? Patience. He says, count all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And when patience runs its course, then you're going to get the answer you want. So I've got a formula for you. Here's the formula. Very simple. Up on the screen. Faith plus patience equals results. Isn't that what happened with Joseph? You know how many years it was from the time he had the dream till his brothers bowed down? It was 22 years. 22 years. 13 years as a slave and a prisoner, then 7 years of good years, and then his brother came in the second year of the famine. It was 22 years before they bowed down and had the fulfillment of that. That is patience. And what he understood was that God is large and in charge, and that he is sovereign, and he has control over all things, and he has not lost sight of you and your problem and your situation. But see, we don't look at things the way James and the way Joseph and the way Jesus looks at things. We want things fast. You know why? We're Pop-Tart Christians. I know some of you look at me and say, I don't even know what a Pop-Tart is. I'll show you what a Pop-Tart is. This is a Pop-Tart. A Pop-Tart is a delicious and nutritious breakfast. And it says right on it, good source of 7 vitamins and minerals. And you know, they're fantastic. And there's actually better ones than this. Look at the next one. This is the Hot Fudge Sundae Pop-Tart. It's got 8 vitamins and minerals, so it's even healthier. And so, do you know how long it takes to make a Pop-Tart? Anyone know? You pop them in the toaster. That's why they're called Pop-Tarts. They pop out of they just pop right out of the toaster, and you eat them. And you know how long it takes? 30 seconds. Takes 30 seconds in the toaster. But you know what? Hey, if you're in a hurry, you don't have to cook them in the toaster. You can actually cook them in the microwave. Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's right on the back of the package. Look right here. It says right there. This is right from the back of the package. It says microwave instructions. Remove pastry from pouch, put in microwave, set on high for 3 seconds, cool briefly before handling. So here's my point in all this. If you need breakfast in 3 seconds, you're probably scheduling your day too tightly. That's what I have to say to you. But what kind of world do we live in where 30 seconds is too slow? And I need my breakfast, nutritious and delicious, in only 3 seconds. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, that can't be true. 3 seconds? So I went out, bought the Pop-Tarts. I know the hot chocolate fudge sundae is healthier, but I bought the strawberry because it's my preferred. It only has 7 minerals. And so I got it, and so I thought I'll test this. So I took it out of the pouch, that's very important, and I stuck it in the microwave. I set it for 3 seconds. Do you know how long 3 seconds is? It went by in the time I asked you how long 3 seconds was. 3 seconds is like 3 seconds. And so I put it in the microwave for 3 seconds. Take it out and bite into it. It's still frozen like a brick. So I thought it's got to be a misprint, right? It must be 30 seconds. So I stick it in the microwave, set it on high, gave it 30 seconds, pulled it out, took a bite. The inside was molten lava and burned my tongue. It was sore for a week. You say, why are you talking about Pop-Tarts? What's that got? That's who we are. We are Pop-Tart Christians. Everything has to be now. We want results now. When we pray, we want it now. I'm praying for patience, Lord, and I need it now. We are impatient people. We want results immediately. And you know whose fault it is? Not Pop-Tarts, not Kellogg's. It's Jesus' fault. See, why is it Jesus' fault? Because when he prayed, he got answers immediately. Did you notice? Have you read the book? You read these stories. He prayed for him. He was healed. Prayed for that person. They rose from the dead. Prayed for that person. Their leprosy was gone. We go, huh? How come that works for Jesus? How come he gets instant results and you don't? Because he's Jesus and you're not. It's not that complicated, right? You're not Jesus. He is. And see, that's a problem for us because we think we should be able to get the same kind of results he got. But here's why you can't have those results. What kind of person would you be? Just speculate. What kind of person would you be if every prayer you prayed was answered immediately the way you wanted it? Happy? I don't think so. You would be, I actually know you, so I'll tell you what you would be. You would be selfish and greedy, is what you would be. We all would. We all would. Right? How many of you know one of those families that has kids, and maybe yours is one of these, where they give the kids everything they want when they want? Those are delightful children, aren't they? What do we call them? We have a name for those kids. What do they call them? Spoiled brats. You all knew what it. And God doesn't want you to be a spoiled brat. And so here's the most important part of this. Here's the biggest reason why he doesn't answer the prayers that you ask when and how you want, is because otherwise you would never grow in faith. You see, it's the adversity. James knows this. He said, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. James knows that struggling and testing of your faith is the actual thing that causes you to grow spiritually. Without that, you're nothing. And we don't love it. Nobody likes it. I'm not saying you enjoy it. But we buck up and we take it and we recognize. I mean, how many years? It was 22 years for Joseph. How many years for Abraham till he had his child from the promise? 25 years. How many years was it for Joshua and Caleb from the time they had the promise till they went into the promised land? 40 years. How many years for Noah from when he got the promise till it actually rained and he built that boat? How many remember? It was 100 years. Now, let me close with one final story here. And this is the story of Wilma Rudolph. Wilma Rudolph was born in rural Tennessee in 1940, the 20th of 22 children. It was a nice big family. And what happened at the age of 4 was she came down with polio. And here's a picture of her, and you can see the picture on the left. There's her legs all deformed. She's in very bad shape. And the doctor said she will never walk on her own. And they devised these, if you look at the picture on the right, they devised these braces, and they put these braces on her legs, and she was able to walk with those braces. And their doctors told her mother very sternly, they said, your daughter will never walk on her own, so you just need to accept that fate. The mother decided she was not going to accept that fate. And every single night, she massaged those little legs, and she pulled those legs, and she straightened those legs, and she prayed Jesus' blessing and healing power over those legs. She did that for the next 5 years. And after 5 years, now Wilma is now 9 years old, and she's developing her own faith and her own sense of patience in the midst of adversity. And she's determined that she's going to walk. And when she was 9 years old, she took those braces off. And for the first time in 5 years, she walked on her own. And it was an amazing thing. By the age of 12, 3 years later, she decided to take up track and field at school. And she went into the meets and started winning all the meets. By the age of 15, she was the state champion in track and field, in sprinting. They called her the Tennessee Tornado. By the time she was 16 years old, she made the 1956 Melbourne Olympic U.S. team. And she went and represented the nation. I mean, this is a crazy story that this gal would be able to do this. Now, they didn't actually place, none of the team, not one of them placed, but Wilma continued to train for the next 4 years. By 1960, at the age of 20, she went to the Rome Olympics and won not one, not two, but 3 gold medals in track and field and was dubbed the fastest woman in the world. This is a crazy story because it's not possible to go from a polio victim to the fastest woman in the world. But that's what happens when you are in prayer, and that's what happens when your faith is tested, and that's what happens when you count it all joy, when you fall into various trials, and that's what happens when you are someone who is full of faith and believes that with God, nothing shall be impossible for you. And Wilma Rudolph always said this, the reward is nothing without the struggle. That's why you need to count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And when patience has had its perfect work, you will be complete, lacking nothing. That is how faith works. Let's stand together.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.